There are moments in history when empires fall, when the walls come down and the flags burn and the world that was ceases to exist. Berlin, April 1945. The 1,000-year Reich is dying. It has lasted 12 years. The city that once hosted Olympic Games and grand parades is now a wasteland of rubble and ash. The streets where Hitler rode in triumph are cratered moonscapes where children fight with rifles too heavy for them to carry. The monuments to German glory are skeletal ruins where Soviet artillery tears through what's left of the Wehrmacht like paper. This is not a story about the fall of Nazi Germany. History has already written that ending. This is a story about two brothers caught in the collapse. One who believed until the very end. One who stopped believing long ago. One who wore the skull and crossbones of the SS. One who wore the Feldgrau of the regular army and wished he wore nothing at all. This is a story about what happens when everything you thought was solid turns to dust in your hands. When the lies you've been told your entire life finally shatter. When you realize too late that you've been on the wrong side of history. This is their story, told by the younger brother, the one who survived, the one who carries a secret that weighs more than all the rubble of Berlin combined. This is a letter he never sent, words he never spoke, a confession he kept locked away for 50 years, until now. This is the truth about what happened in the ruins of Berlin in April 1945. This is the story of two brothers and the choice that destroyed them both.
My name is Friedrich Steiner. I am 73 years old. I live in a small apartment in Munich where no one knows who I was or what I did. For 50 years, I have carried a lie. I told my mother that my brother died a hero. I told his wife, his children, everyone who asked, that he fell defending Berlin against the Bolshevik hordes, that he died for Germany, that his last words were of the fatherland and honor and all the pretty lies we used to dress up the horror. But that is not what happened. That is not how my brother died. And I am old now, old enough that death is no longer some distant possibility, but a neighbor I see every morning in the mirror. And before I die, I need to tell the truth. Not for absolution. There is no absolution for what I did, but because someone needs to know. Someone needs to remember. Someone needs to understand what war does to people, what it did to us. My brother's name was Klaus. He was 3 years older than me. Growing up, he was everything I wanted to be, tall, strong, confident. He was the one who taught me to swim in the Spree, who protected me from bullies at school, who made me laugh when our father came home drunk and angry. When we were children, we were inseparable. We had a pact, sealed with blood from our thumbs pressed together, that we would always protect each other, that nothing would ever come between us. We were brothers. We thought that meant something eternal. The war changed him. Or maybe it just revealed what was always there. I don't know anymore. In 1938, when he was 17, he joined the Hitler Youth. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He came home wearing that uniform with such pride, talking about the future of Germany, about our destiny as a master race, about the glorious 1,000 years that awaited us. I was 14. I thought he looked ridiculous. But I said nothing because he was my brother and I loved him. By 1941, he had joined the Waffen-SS. I remember the day he came home in that black uniform with the death's head on his collar. My mother cried, not tears of pride like Klaus thought, but tears of fear. She knew what that uniform meant, what those men did. But Klaus was radiant. He had found his purpose, he had found his faith, and in Nazi Germany, faith in the Führer was the only religion that mattered. I was conscripted in 1943, 18 years old, pulled from university, where I had been studying literature, handed a rifle and told I was now a soldier of the Reich. I didn't want to go. I had seen what the war was doing, the letters from the Eastern Front that stopped coming. The boys from our neighborhood who left and never returned, the widows and orphans who multiplied like shadows. But you didn't say no, not in 1943, not if you wanted to keep breathing. We served in different units for most of the war. Klaus on the Eastern Front with his SS division, doing God knows what in those endless Russian winters. Me in France, then Belgium, then the retreat into Germany itself as the Allies pushed east and the Soviets pushed west, and the thousand-year Reich crumbled month by month, week by week, day by day. We wrote letters occasionally. His were full of victory and glory and the inevitable triumph of German will. Mine were empty platitudes about duty and service because I had learned by then that the censors read everything and doubt was treason. I saw him again in April 1945, Berlin. The city of our childhood was unrecognizable. Whole neighborhoods had been erased by bombing. The streets were canyons of rubble. The air was thick with dust and smoke and the smell of corpses that couldn't be buried fast enough. The Soviet artillery never stopped. It was a constant thunder on the horizon, growing closer every day. Everyone knew it was over. Everyone except the fanatics. And there were still so many fanatics. Klaus was one of them. I found him in what used to be a government building, now just broken walls and exposed rooms open to the sky. He was thinner than I remembered, hollow-eyed, his uniform dirty and torn, but that skull and crossbones still prominent on his collar. When he saw me, he smiled. My God, he smiled. As if we were meeting for coffee instead of standing in the apocalypse. "Friedrich," he said, embracing me, "thank God. I thought I'd lost you." We fought together for the next 3 weeks. His SS unit and my Wehrmacht company were thrown together in the chaos of the final defense. Defense, that's what they called it, as if there was anything left to defend, as if Berlin wasn't already a corpse and we were just maggots fighting over the remains. But orders were orders, and desertion meant a noose from the nearest lamppost with a sign around your neck that said traitor. The SS and the Feldgendarmerie were hanging people every day, old men, young boys, anyone who tried to flee, their bodies swung in the wind like obscene fruit. The fighting was unlike anything I had experienced. This wasn't war, this was butchery. House to house, room to room, sometimes hand to hand with knives and entrenching tools and bare hands when the ammunition ran out. The Soviets came in waves, endless waves, and they were angry, rightfully angry. We had done terrible things in Russia, things that Klaus never talked about, but that I heard whispered among the men, and now the Russians were here for revenge. Klaus fought like a demon, fearless, ruthless, efficient. He saved my life twice in the first week. Once, when a Russian soldier had me pinned in a collapsed cellar, Klaus appeared from nowhere and shot the man in the back of the head. Once, when artillery fire trapped us in a burning building, Klaus found a way out through the sewers. He was my brother. He protected me, just like when we were children. Except now we were protecting each other from the consequences of our nation's sins. But I saw things I couldn't ignore, things that made me understand who my brother had become. There was an incident on the 4th day. We had captured a building that the Soviets were using as a command post. Inside, we found 3 Soviet soldiers, wounded, unable to fight. They surrendered immediately, hands up, begging in Russian. One of them couldn't have been more than 16, a boy in a uniform too big for him. I was ready to take them prisoner. Klaus shot all 3 of them in the head, execution style, 1, 2, 3, like it was nothing, like they were nothing. I confronted him. "Klaus, what are you doing?" They surrendered. He looked at me like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. "We don't have resources for prisoners, Friedrich. We barely have resources for ourselves. Besides, they're Bolsheviks, subhuman. You know what they've done to our people. This is justice." Justice, he called it justice. I saw it for what it was, murder. But I said nothing more. Because what could I say? Because we were in hell and the rules of civilization had burned away months ago. Because he was my brother, and some part of me still loved him even as I began to fear what he had become. The second week was worse. The Soviets were pushing into the city center now. The ring was tightening. We could hear them at night, singing, celebrating, because they knew they had won. We could hear the propaganda broadcasts in German telling us to surrender, that the war was over, that Hitler had abandoned us. Klaus would shoot at the loudspeakers in rage. Lies, he would spit. The Führer would never abandon Germany. Victory or death. There is no third option. Victory or death. The official slogan of the fanatics. But there was no victory coming. Anyone with eyes could see that. Anyone except Klaus and the others like him who had turned Nazism into a religion and couldn't conceive of a world where their God had failed them. I watched them, these true believers, and I realized they were more dangerous now than they had ever been. Cornered animals with nothing left to lose. We were defending a sector near the Reichstag. The building itself was already a ruin, but symbolically important. The Soviets wanted it. We were ordered to hold it. Hold it with what? I don't know. We had maybe 30 men left. Most were boys from the Hitler Youth, 14 and 15 years old, given rifles and told to be heroes. They were terrified. They cried for their mothers at night. Some of them pissed themselves when the shelling started. But they fought anyway because the alternative was a noose. One of these boys, his name was Peter, couldn't have been more than 13. He reminded me of Klaus and me at that age. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the perfect Aryan specimen the propaganda posters loved. He was attached to our unit, carrying ammunition that was too heavy for his small frame. He tried so hard to be brave, tried so hard to please Klaus, who represented everything he'd been taught to aspire to. Klaus took him under his wing, taught him to shoot properly, told him stories about German glory, filled his head with the same poison that had infected an entire generation. On April 28th, Peter was killed by a Soviet sniper. Single shot to the head. He died instantly, which was a mercy. Klaus found his body. I watched my brother's face as he knelt beside this dead child. I thought for just a moment that I saw something break in him. Some flicker of recognition that this was wrong, that this entire thing was wrong, that we had sent children to die for a lie. But then his face hardened. He stood up. He loaded his weapon, and he went hunting. He found a group of Soviet soldiers 2 hours later in a collapsed apartment building. They had taken shelter there, maybe 6 or 7 of them. Klaus killed them all, not in combat. He waited until nightfall and went in quietly with grenades and his knife. I followed him because I was his brother and because I was afraid of what he would do. I watched him slit the throat of a sleeping man, watched him shoot another who was eating from a tin can, watched him throw a grenade into a room where men were huddled around a small fire trying to stay warm. When it was done, we stood in that room filled with bodies. The fire was still burning. Someone's photograph was burning in it, curling black in the flames. A picture of a woman and 2 small children. Klaus was breathing hard, covered in blood, and I realized I didn't know this person anymore. This wasn't my brother. This was something the war had created. A monster in a German uniform who justified atrocity with duty and revenge, and all the twisted logic that lets humans do inhuman things. Klaus, I said, we need to stop this. It's over. The war is over. We need to surrender while we still can. He turned to me and his eyes, God, his eyes were empty. Empty of everything except that terrible faith that had sustained him through 4 years of slaughter. The war is not over until Germany wins or every German is dead. Those are the only 2 endings, Friedrich. There is no surrender. There is no mercy. Not for them, not for us. We fight until we can't fight anymore, and then we die. That is what we owe the fatherland. I should have known then. I should have seen what was coming. But I was tired and scared, and still clinging to the hope that somewhere in that monster was my brother. That somewhere in that darkness was the boy who taught me to swim and protected me from bullies and made me laugh when the world was cruel. I was wrong. That boy had died somewhere on the Eastern Front. I just hadn't accepted it yet. April 29th, the day that changed everything. We were holed up in the basement of a destroyed apartment block. maybe 15 of us left. We hadn't eaten in 2 days. We had almost no ammunition. The Soviets were 2 blocks away. We could hear them, their tanks, their voices, the sound of a victorious army that knew the war was in its final hours. Klaus was talking about a counterattack, a glorious last stand that would somehow turn the tide. The other men looked at him like he was insane. Maybe he was. Maybe we all were by then. That's when we heard it. A sound from deeper in the basement. Voices. German voices. Speaking quietly, Klaus grabbed his weapon. "Deserters," he hissed. The SS had made deserter hunting their primary mission in the final days. They killed more Germans than Russians in those last weeks. We moved toward the sound, Klaus leading, me following because I always followed. We found them in a sealed room behind a false wall. A family. A man. A woman. 3 children. And I knew immediately what they were, even before I saw the yellow stars they had torn from their clothes, but hadn't completely destroyed. Jews. A Jewish family that had somehow survived in hiding for God knows how long. Survived the camps, the roundups, the systematic extermination. Survived until the very end, only to be found now in the final hours when liberation was so close they could probably hear it coming. The man stood in front of his family. He was old, maybe 60, thin to the point of starvation. But he stood straight. "Please," he said in German, "please. The war is over. The Russians will be here tomorrow. Just let us wait, just one more day." His wife was behind him, clutching the children. The children were silent. They had learned long ago that silence was survival. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10. Klaus raised his rifle. I watched him do it. Watched him aim at that old man who was just trying to protect his family. Just like Klaus had protected me, just like we had all been trying to protect each other. "Step aside," Klaus said. His voice was calm, terribly calm, like he was asking someone to move out of the way in a crowded street. "Step aside and I'll make it quick." I grabbed his arm. "Klaus, no, they're civilians. They're no threat to us. We can just leave them here. No one has to know." He shook me off. "They're Jews, Friedrich, enemies of the Reich. We have orders. All Jews are to be eliminated. Those orders still stand. I don't care if the Russians are at the door. I don't care if the world is ending. A German soldier follows orders." The old man was still standing there, still protecting his family. There was no fear in his face anymore, just a terrible sadness, just the look of someone who has seen too much and is too tired to be afraid anymore. "You're going to kill us," he said quietly. "After everything, after all of it, you're going to kill us now. 24 hours from freedom." Klaus said nothing. He just aimed his rifle, and I made my choice. I don't know where it came from, some part of me that the war hadn't destroyed yet, some memory of who I used to be before all this, some voice in my head, maybe my mother's, maybe my own, saying that there are lines you don't cross, that there are things you don't do, no matter what uniform you wear or what orders you've been given. That some things matter more than duty or survival or the twisted loyalty to a dying regime. I shot my brother, 1 bullet in the back. He never saw it coming, never knew it was me. He fell forward, the rifle slipping from his hands, and I watched him collapse onto that basement floor. I watched my brother die, the brother who had taught me to swim, who had protected me, who I had loved more than anyone in the world. I killed him. The family stared at me. The old man stared at me. I could hear Klaus breathing, wet, labored, dying. I knelt beside him, turned him over. He looked up at me, and I saw the confusion in his eyes, the betrayal. "Friedrich," he whispered, "why? Why would you do this? We're brothers. We protect each other. That's the pact. That's what we promised." "Because you were going to murder them," I said. I was crying. I couldn't stop crying, because you were going to kill children, because this has to end somewhere. It has to stop somewhere, and if it stops with me killing you, then that's what happens. "I'm sorry, Klaus. I'm so sorry. But I can't let you do this. He tried to say something else, tried to reach for me, but the life was already leaving him. I watched my brother die in my arms in a basement in Berlin while Soviet artillery shook the walls, and the family he would have murdered stood silent and watched. He died believing I had betrayed him. He died believing I was the traitor. Maybe I was. Maybe that's exactly what I was. A traitor to Germany and the Reich and everything he believed in. But I could live with that. I couldn't live with standing by while he executed children. I turned to the family. "You need to stay here," I told them. "The Russians will be here tomorrow, maybe sooner. Stay hidden until then." They nodded. The old man came forward. He put his hand on my shoulder. He didn't say thank you. What thanks could possibly be adequate? He just looked at me with those sad, ancient eyes and nodded. Then he went back to his family, and they disappeared into the shadows of that basement room. I took Klaus's body with me, dragged him up out of that basement and through the rubble-strewn streets. I found what was left of our unit, told them he'd been killed by a Soviet sniper, that he died a hero, that his last words were of Germany and victory. They believed me. Why wouldn't they? The city was full of dead heroes. One more made no difference. The Russians came the next day, May 1st. We surrendered, those of us who were left. The war ended, not with glory or triumph, but with exhausted men throwing down their weapons and just wanting it to be over. I spent 2 years in a Soviet prison camp. I survived, came home to a Germany that didn't exist anymore, found my mother, told her the lie about Klaus, watched her cry and tell me how proud she was of him, how he died for something that mattered. I never told the truth. Not to her, not to Klaus's wife, who remarried eventually and raised his children telling them their father was a hero. Not to anyone. I buried it deep inside and built a life on top of it. I got married, had children of my own, worked as a teacher, ironically enough, taught literature to German children, and never spoke about the war except in the vaguest terms. I became a normal man living a normal life in a country that was desperately trying to forget what it had been. But I never forgot. I remembered Klaus every day, remembered the sound of the gunshot, remembered the look in his eyes, remembered that family in the basement. I don't know if they survived. I don't know their names. I don't know if they made it to freedom or if some other fanatic found them in those final hours. I hope they lived. I need to believe they lived, because if they didn't, if I killed my brother for nothing, then I don't know how I can bear the weight of it. People ask me sometimes why I never talk about the war, why I don't attend the veterans' gatherings, why I don't display my medals or tell stories about the glory days. They think I'm ashamed. They're right, but not for the reasons they imagine. I'm not ashamed of losing. I'm not ashamed that Germany fell. I'm ashamed of what we did, what we became, what I was part of even as I tried to stop it. I'm ashamed that I wore that uniform, that I followed those orders for as long as I did, that I waited until the very end to finally say no. And I'm ashamed that part of me, even now 50 years later, misses my brother, not the monster he became, but the boy he was, the brother who protected me, the person he might have been if we had been born in a different time, a different place, a different world where 12 years of madness didn't consume an entire nation and turn children into killers. I killed my brother to save strangers. Some nights, I'm not sure I made the right choice. Most nights, I know I did. But knowing you did the right thing doesn't make it easier to live with, doesn't make the weight lighter, doesn't make the nightmares stop. I see him in my dreams. He asks me why I betrayed him, why I broke our pact. And I never have a good answer except to say that some things matter more than blood, that humanity matters. That even in the darkest places, even in the ruins of civilization, we have to choose to remain human, or we lose everything that makes us worth saving. This is my confession. This is my truth. I killed my brother in April 1945 in a basement in Berlin to save a Jewish family from execution. I lied about it for 50 years, and now, at the end of my life, I'm telling you this because someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand that war doesn't just kill bodies. It kills souls. It kills the best parts of us and leaves only the worst. It turns brothers against each other and makes murderers of ordinary men and creates situations where the only moral choice is an impossible one. If you learn anything from my story, learn this. War is not glory. It is not heroism. It is not the romantic adventure that propaganda makes it out to be. War is horror. War is choosing between killing your brother or letting him kill innocents. War is surviving with guilt that never fades. War is living the rest of your life wondering if you could have done something different, something better, something that didn't require you to destroy the person you loved most in the world. I am 73 years old. I have lived 50 years past that April day. 50 years of normal life, marriage, children, grandchildren, ordinary days filled with ordinary concerns. But that basement is always with me. Klaus is always with me. The weight of that choice is always with me, and it will be with me until the day I die, which I suspect is not far off now. And when I die, I will finally have to face my brother again. I don't know what I'll say to him. I don't know if there are words that can bridge what I did, but I hope somehow he understands. I hope he knows that I loved him, that I will always love him, and that I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry, but I would do it again. If faced with that same choice in that same moment, I would pull that trigger again, because some things are worth more than brotherhood. Some things are worth more than loyalty or duty or any of the lies we tell ourselves to justify the unjustifiable. Human life is worth more. Innocence is worth more. The choice to be humane in an inhuman world is worth more, even if it costs you everything, even if it costs you your soul. That is my story. That is the truth about the ruins of Berlin in April 1945. That is what war really looks like when you strip away the glory and the propaganda and the lies. It looks like two brothers in a basement making choices that will haunt them forever. It looks like the end of everything you thought you believed. It looks like rubble and blood and the terrible weight of deciding who lives and who dies. And it looks like 50 years of silence because the truth is too heavy to speak aloud. Until now. My name is Friedrich Steiner. I killed my brother and I lived.
This letter was found among Friedrich Steiner's possessions after his death in 1995 in Munich, Germany. He was 73 years old. He never sent the letter, never spoke of it. It was discovered by his daughter, who struggled for years with whether to make it public. In 2015, on the 70th anniversary of the fall of Berlin, she decided the world needed to hear it. She was right. Friedrich's story is fiction, but it could have been real. In the ruins of Berlin in April 1945, thousands of stories like this played out. Brothers killing brothers, fathers killing sons. Ordinary men faced with impossible choices in the final collapse of a regime built on hate and lies. Some chose humanity, some chose fanaticism, and all of them paid a terrible price. War does not make heroes, it makes survivors. And survival, real survival, means living with the weight of everything you saw and everything you did and everything you failed to stop. Friedrich Steiner survived, but the cost was carrying his brother's death for 50 years in silence. That is the real price of war. Not the dead, but the living who must carry them. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of the cost of extremism and the value of choosing humanity even when it destroys you, please let us know. Leave a like, subscribe to this channel, and in the comments tell us where in the world you're listening from. Because these stories, these voices, these terrible truths need to be heard. They need to be remembered, so that maybe, just maybe, we learned something from the ruins. Thank you for listening, and remember, in the darkest moments, The choice to remain human is the only choice that matters, even when it costs you everything.